Before potatoes conquered Europe, a variety of remarkable crops sustained its people. These lost foods thrived in challenging conditions, enduring harsh winters and poor soil to nourish medieval populations. Let's delve into the medieval cookbook and rediscover some of these nutritional powerhouses, some of which may even surpass the potato. The reign of the parsnip. The parsnip, that humble root vegetable, was a culinary kingpin in Europe for centuries, before the arrival of the potato in the 1500s. Resembling a pale carrot, parsnips were ubiquitous in medieval kitchens, essentially the era's equivalent of French fries, though of course without the "would you like a parsnip with that?" query at the local tavern. Medieval farmers cultivated parsnips extensively, and for good reason. Unlike many modern vegetables that demand ideal conditions, parsnips flourished in Europe's harsh climate. They withstood freezing winters, even becoming sweeter after a frost. In fact, they are unique in that they actually improve when neglected, unlike that leftover stew that transforms into a science experiment in your refrigerator. Parsnips were invaluable during the long, harsh winters. A medium parsnip provides roughly 100 calories and is rich in fiber, vitamin C, and potassium. For medieval peasants, whose daily caloric intake ranged from 2,000 to 3,000 calories, largely from bread, parsnips offered essential nutrients when fresh food was scarce. In particularly severe winters, parsnips might comprise nearly a third of a peasant's diet. The parsnip's versatility was key to its prominence. Medieval cooks mashed them, roasted them alongside meats, and incorporated them into stews for added thickness and flavor. Their natural sweetness even made them a common ingredient in medieval desserts. A time-traveling medieval chef, upon seeing our modern grocery stores with their abundance of cheap sugar, would likely faint faster than a knight in full armor on a hot summer day. Even more impressive was the parsnip's ability to thrive in poor soil. Medieval farming practices were rudimentary, and fields were often depleted of nutrients. While other crops faltered, parsnips sent their long tap roots deep into the earth, extracting nutrients inaccessible to other plants. These were the overachievers of the plant world, flourishing in conditions so poor that other vegetables would lodge a formal complaint with medieval management. The importance of parsnips is evident in medieval taxation records where, in many regions, farmers paid a portion of their parsnip harvest as tax to lords or the church. Nothing signifies a vegetable's importance quite like the government demanding a share of your root crop profits. Monasteries maintained vast parsnip fields to feed the poor during winter, acting as medieval food banks, albeit ones that distributed sacks of parsnips rather than canned goods, along with a pamphlet on avoiding sin. Parsnips also stored well, remaining viable in the ground throughout winter or in cool, dry places for months. This was crucial before the advent of refrigeration. For medieval families, a stockpile of parsnips ensured survival through the lean months of late winter, when food supplies dwindled. So, what led to the parsnip's decline? The arrival of potatoes from the Americas. Potatoes offered higher yields and were slightly easier to store long-term. Within a few generations, the parsnip transitioned from dinnertime hero to forgotten vegetable, essentially vegetable ghosted by European farmers after a 1,000-year relationship. Talk about agricultural drama. Emmer, an ancient grain. Parsnips sustained the common folk through the harshest winters, but let's look at another staple. Long before potatoes arrived, Emmer wheat was a dietary cornerstone. Medieval farmers didn't just grow crops. They continued an agricultural tradition older than most castles, cathedrals, and royal family trees combined. Emmer wheat, one of the first crops domesticated by humans around 10,000 years ago, had nourished civilizations for millennia by medieval times. Its hardiness was remarkable. It thrived in poor, rocky soil that would defeat modern wheat varieties. Despite rudimentary wooden plows and poorly fertilized fields, Emmer wheat produced reliable harvests year after year. Nutritionally, Emmer was impressive, containing about 30% more protein than common wheat, along with higher levels of minerals like zinc, iron, and magnesium. Medieval bread made from Emmer wheat was dense, heavy, and often dark. If you dropped a loaf on your foot, you'd have a medieval medical emergency on your hands. This hearty bread formed the basis of the medieval diet, accounting for up to 70% of a person's daily calories. Emmer wheat was so vital that its scarcity could trigger riots. Historical records document bread riots erupting when grain supplies were low or prices soared. Medieval people took their carbohydrates very seriously. Bread shortages caused more social upheaval than a modern internet outage. The grain was so valuable that it often served as currency, with peasants paying taxes to lords in measures of grain rather than coins. Many monasteries and castles maintained grain stores sufficient to feed hundreds for months. So, why did Emmer disappear? Beginning in the late medieval period, common wheat gradually replaced Emmer because it was easier to process. Emmer has a tough husk that adheres tightly to the grain, requiring extra steps for removal. As medieval agriculture slowly industrialized, Emmer fell out of favor, despite its nutritional advantages and hardiness. Medieval bread made from Emmer had a nutty, complex flavor that many food historians consider superior to modern wheat bread. A medieval peasant would find modern bread suspiciously soft and bland, probably mistaking it for cake. Emmer wheat provided the daily sustenance that fueled the construction of everything from cathedrals to plowed fields. Its dense, protein-rich bread gave medieval workers the energy to build the massive structures we still marvel at today. Fava beans, the protein powerhouse. But bread alone wasn't enough. Medieval workers needed protein, and for that, they turned to the fava bean. These unassuming legumes were medieval Europe's primary protein source, long before modern meat production became commonplace. They powered the muscles that built cathedrals, castles, and entire kingdoms. Unlike exotic spices or fine wines, fava beans weren't just for the wealthy. They appeared on tables from the poorest peasant hovels to royal banquet halls. Archaeological digs at medieval sites consistently find fava bean remains in latrines and garbage pits across all social classes. The fava bean was the great social equalizer of the Middle Ages, a food consumed by both kings and peasants. Fava beans earned their place in medieval agriculture through sheer efficiency. They produce more protein per acre than almost any other crop of the time. A single acre could yield up to 1,500 pounds of dried beans, providing roughly 500 pounds of complete protein, enough to supply about 20 people with their annual protein needs. Raising enough cattle to produce the same amount of protein would have required about 15 acres of grazing land. Cultivating fava beans also improved the soil. Unlike other crops that deplete it, fava beans have a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in their root nodules. These bacteria convert atmospheric nitrogen into a usable form for plants, acting as natural fertilizer factories. Medieval farmers, though unaware of the science, observed. That crops grew better after fava beans. Many farming manuals from the period recommended rotating fields between grains and beans to maintain soil health. Fava beans were so essential to food security that they appeared in medieval law codes. In parts of England, local ordinances mandated that every household with a garden dedicate a portion to growing fava beans. French monastic records show bean seeds being distributed to peasant farmers as charity during times of shortage. Being forced to grow beans by law might sound like a medieval punishment, but it was actually closer to government-mandated health insurance. The nutritional profile of fava beans suited the medieval diet perfectly. They contain about 26% protein by weight when dried, along with high levels of fiber, B vitamins, and minerals like iron, manganese, and copper. Just 1 cup of cooked fava beans provides nearly half the daily protein needs of an adult. For medieval people who couldn't afford meat regularly, fava beans often meant the difference between proper nutrition and malnutrition. Medieval cooks prepared fava beans in countless ways. Young, tender pods could be eaten fresh. More commonly, dried beans were soaked overnight, then boiled and added to soups, stews, and porridges. Wealthier households seasoned them with expensive imported spices, while humble peasant families used herbs from their gardens. Some recipes called for mashing cooked beans into a paste, forming patties, and frying them in lard or oil, essentially creating medieval veggie burgers. During Lent, when church rules forbade meat consumption for 40 days, fava beans became even more crucial. Medieval monks subsisting on beans and prayer may have experienced spiritual visions, or perhaps just unprecedented flatulence. Either way, bean consumption spiked dramatically during religious fasting periods. However, fava beans weren't universally beneficial. Some people of Mediterranean descent carry a genetic trait called glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, which can cause a dangerous reaction called favism upon consuming fava beans. This condition was recognized even in medieval times, though not scientifically understood. Medical texts from the period warned that some people became ill after eating beans, but the cause remained a mystery. As meat production became more efficient in later centuries, fava beans gradually lost their prominence in European agriculture. Yet, their legacy endures in traditional dishes across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. In parts of Italy and Spain, dried fava beans are still ground into flour for bread making, continuing a tradition. That stretches back over 1,000 years. Buckwheat, the fast food of the Middle Ages. Fava beans provided the protein that built medieval muscles, but other nutrients were also needed. For that, communities turned to buckwheat, a fast-growing crop that could be planted in the gaps of the growing season. Buckwheat was the medieval fast food that sustained people when other crops needed more time. Despite its name, buckwheat is not related to wheat. It's actually a seed related to rhubarb. Calling buckwheat a type of wheat is as misleading as calling a guinea pig a type of pork, but the name stuck. Buckwheat's superpower was its incredible growth speed. While wheat required months to mature, buckwheat could be harvested in just 10 to 12 weeks. Medieval farmers often planted it as an insurance policy. If the main grain harvest failed, buckwheat could still prevent winter famine. It was essentially the medieval equivalent of ordering pizza when you burned dinner, a reliable backup plan. This humble plant thrived in poor, acidic soils where other crops struggled. It grew happily in rocky, sandy, or clay-heavy fields with minimal nutrients. It was the "I'll eat whatever's in the refrigerator and won't complain" plant of the medieval farming world. Medieval cooks used buckwheat in porridge, pancakes, rustic bread, and even beer. The resulting dark beer was cheaper than barley beer and still provided calories and nutrients. Medieval buckwheat beer probably tasted like liquid bread with a kick, but after a day of hauling stones for cathedral construction, nobody was posting one-star reviews about subtle flavor notes. Buckwheat's nutritional profile would impress modern health influencers. It contains all 8 essential amino acids, making it a complete protein source. Cup for cup, medieval buckwheat provided more protein than modern oatmeal, more antioxidants than many fruits, and a fiber content that puts white bread to shame. If medieval buckwheat had an Instagram account today, it would be posting gym selfies and selling nutrition plans. Even more remarkable was buckwheat's ability to improve soil health. Its quick, dense growth suppressed weeds and prevented erosion. Its roots released compounds that made phosphorus more available to future plantings. Medieval farmers didn't understand the chemistry, but they knew that fields where buckwheat had grown produced better yields the following season. Buckwheat was essentially fertilizing the fields and fighting weeds while also feeding people, a medieval multitasker that makes our attempts at work-life balance look pathetic. So, why did buckwheat fall from favor? As agriculture industrialized, crops were valued based on yield and storage stability. Wheat, corn, and rice all store longer and produce more calories per acre. Buckwheat was essentially fired from its job as a major crop for being too quirky and independent, qualities that might make for an interesting co-worker, but don't fit well with industrial agriculture. Today, buckwheat is sold at premium prices as a superfood, a concept that would baffle medieval farmers who saw it as humble emergency food. Medieval peasants would be shocked to see urban professionals paying $15 for a small bag of what was once considered the backup plan when better grains weren't available. You're paying how much for the emergency food? Did all the real food disappear? Good King Henry. A winter green. When winter set in and fresh foods became scarce, medieval communities relied on stored goods like buckwheat, but they also found ways to supplement their diet with hardy greens that could withstand frost and snow. One such plant was Good King Henry. Good King Henry has triangular, arrow-shaped, dark green leaves that somewhat resemble spinach. Unlike its modern cousins, it could survive brutal winter conditions. Frost that would kill most vegetables simply couldn't defeat it. Medieval winters were tough, but this plant was tougher, like that one neighbor who wears shorts year-round, regardless of the weather. The name Good King Henry likely comes from a corruption of Guter Heinrich in German, referring to household spirits believed to help around the home, appropriate for a plant that seemed to magically appear just when people needed it most. Good King Henry's versatility was truly special. Young shoots could be harvested in early spring and prepared like asparagus. The tender leaves were used in soups, stews, and medieval stuffing mixtures. The seeds could even be ground and added to flour for bread in times of extreme shortage. Nutritionally, Good King Henry was a powerhouse. Rich in vitamins A and C, it provided crucial nutrients when scurvy threatened winter health. The leaves contained significant amounts of iron, calcium, and potassium, all vital minerals often lacking in the limited winter diet of bread and preserved meats. Medieval households didn't grow Good King Henry in organized rows like modern vegetables. Instead, they encouraged it to grow in semi-wild patches near their homes. They would protect these patches and scatter its seeds in convenient locations where it could thrive with minimal care. It was essentially medieval meal prep. Set it up once and forget about it until dinner time. Once established, Good King Henry would return year after year without replanting. Some patches are known to have survived for decades, feeding multiple generations of the same family. Even in years when annual crops failed due to bad weather or political unrest, Good King Henry would still appear, as reliable as the seasons themselves. Despite its medieval popularity, Good King Henry almost completely disappeared from our diets by the 19th century. As farming became more commercialized, vegetables were increasingly valued for their yield, storage ability, and uniformity, qualities that this wild-hearted plant lacked. Good King Henry was essentially pushed out of agriculture by vegetables with better marketing teams and more commercial appeal. Modern consumers would likely walk past a patch of Good King Henry to get to the organic spinach display at Whole Foods, never realizing they were ignoring a vegetable that kept their ancestors alive through countless harsh winters. Barley, the staff of life and libation. While hardy greens like Good King Henry helped medieval people survive the lean months, they knew that survival required more than just vegetables. Every medieval village relied on another ancient crop, barley. If you had to choose one crop that defined medieval life from sunup to sundown, barley would win hands down. This humble grain wasn't just food, it was breakfast, dinner, and the beverage that washed it all down. Barley was ubiquitous in medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence consistently shows barley as the most commonly found grain, often accounting for over 50% of all grain remains. Unlike fancier grains, barley grew well in poor soil and harsh climates, making it ideal for the less than perfect farming conditions of medieval Europe. Barley's versatility made it particularly valuable. The grain could be ground into flour for bread, especially for the lower classes. It could also be boiled whole into a porridge that served as a staple breakfast across Europe. But barley's most significant role in medieval society was as the primary ingredient in beer, the daily beverage of choice for almost everyone. Water sources were often contaminated, while the brewing process made beer safer. to drink. Medieval people weren't drinking beer all day because they wanted to party. They were trying not to get sick from the water, which is probably the most responsible reason ever to be slightly buzzed at breakfast. The average medieval adult consumed between 1 and 5 liters of beer daily. Manorial records from 13th century England show that brewing consumed up to 30% of the total barley harvest in some areas. The brewing process kills harmful bacteria, and the resulting beer provided calories, nutrients, and safe hydration. Barley also played a crucial role in feeding medieval armies. Military campaigns relied on barley because, when dried, it was lightweight, could be quickly turned into porridge in field conditions, and traveled well without spoiling. The famous hardtack biscuits that sustained armies were often made with barley flour. They were so tough that medieval soldiers probably had better dental insurance than we do today. Oh wait, they didn't have any, which explains a lot about medieval teeth. Barley's nutritional profile made it ideal for sustaining hard-working medieval bodies. 1 pound of barley contains approximately 1,650 calories and 50 grams of protein, roughly half the daily caloric needs of a medieval laborer working in the fields or constructing a cathedral. Barley even influenced medieval social structures. Many tenant farmers paid their rent in barley, and feudal obligations often included helping with the barley harvest on the lord's land. A good barley harvest could literally determine whether a family would survive until the next year or face starvation. Interestingly, barley brewing created opportunities for women in medieval society. Brewing was often considered women's work in many parts of Europe until the later Middle Ages. Female brewers, known as alewives, produced beer in their homes and sold the surplus. These medieval businesswomen were essentially running the equivalent of craft breweries long before bearded guys in flannel shirts made it trendy. Rediscovering the past for the future. Surprisingly, many food experts and farmers are beginning to re-examine these resilient crops with renewed interest, especially as we face challenges that our medieval ancestors would have understood all too well. These forgotten medieval crops aren't just historical curiosities. They may be precisely what modern agriculture needs. As climate change brings unpredictable weather and soil struggle to support intensive farming, these ancient varieties offer surprising solutions. Medieval crops, like fava beans, naturally fixed nitrogen in the soil, while buckwheat made phosphorus more available and suppressed weeds. Emmer wheat thrived in poor soil that would defeat modern varieties, and parsnips survived harsh winters, even improving in flavor after frost. As weather patterns become more extreme, these hardy crops offer reliability when modern varieties might fail. Their nutritional profiles also deserve a fresh look. Ancient varieties like Emmer contain more protein and minerals than modern wheat. Buckwheat offers complete protein and better blood sugar control. These medieval crops were essentially superfoods before influencers started charging $20 for smoothies made with them. Small-scale farmers and chefs are already leading this revival. Emmer wheat has reappeared as farro on restaurant menus, and craft brewers are experimenting with historical grain varieties. Food security experts point to these forgotten crops as important tools for agricultural diversity. Medieval peasants would probably be confused to see their survival foods rebranded as luxury items, but they would undoubtedly appreciate the irony of wealthy people suddenly discovering what kept poor folks alive for centuries. Perhaps it's time we learned from the practical wisdom of medieval farmers, who managed to feed populations without fossil fuels, chemical fertilizers, or global supply chains.